She rolled up to the counter, her hands trembling on the wheels of her chair, just wanting to cash a simple check. But the teller's smirk said everything, the kind that cuts deeper than words ever could. Eyes rolled, whispers followed, and what began as a routine errand soon turned into public humiliation. She didn't know who he really was. She didn't know the kind of power she had just mocked. Because sometimes the people we look down on are the very ones standing above us, and what happened next would leave an entire town questioning what respect really means. Before we begin this intense story, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Your support keeps powerful stories like this alive. The morning sun filtered through the expansive glass windows of Lincoln State Bank, turning the polished marble floor into a mirror of light and motion. Customers came and went, their shoes tapping in rhythm to the quiet hum of printers and murmured greetings. Behind the counter, the smell of paper, ink, and freshly brewed coffee hung in the air, the aroma of a weekday routine. At the far end of the lobby, Angela Reed straightened her name badge and forced a polite smile. She'd been a teller here for 6 years, long enough to know every regular, every shortcut, and every unspoken hierarchy. She liked things in order, neat stacks, clear desks, predictable customers. Anything that didn't fit that image made her uncomfortable. That morning, as she balanced the till and adjusted her mirror, she caught her reflection, a young woman with ambition burning behind her eyes. She told herself she was destined for more than this counter. Maybe a manager's position soon, perhaps even her own branch someday. She believed hard work earned respect. But her idea of respect came with quiet biases she never questioned. Across town, Marcus Green was starting his morning too, in a quieter, slower way. The motorized whir of his wheelchair echoed softly through the open-plan kitchen as he poured himself coffee with careful precision. His movements were steady but deliberate. Every small action a reminder of how much independence had cost him. 10 years ago, an accident had changed everything. A collision caused by a distracted driver left his spine permanently damaged. But what most people didn't know was that Marcus had turned that tragedy into something remarkable. After months of rehab and depression, he went back to school, earned his degree in finance, and built a company from his bedroom, a fintech startup that grew faster than anyone expected. By 42, Marcus had become the silent owner of several regional banks, including one he was visiting today. He preferred staying in the background, letting his board and management team handle day-to-day matters. But lately, he'd noticed discrepancies. Poor customer treatment reports, anonymous complaints, especially targeting minority clients. He wanted to see for himself, so he decided to walk, or rather roll, through the front doors like any other customer. No press, no assistance, no announcement. Just a man cashing a check. The streets were already alive with motion when Marcus left his condo. Horns honked, the air buzzed with city chatter, and somewhere nearby a bus hissed to a stop. He moved carefully down the ramp, his dark suit crisp, his watch gleaming faintly in the sunlight. To most passers-by, he was just another man on wheels. To those who looked a little closer, there was quiet dignity in the way he carried himself, a calm that came from knowing who he was, even when others didn't. As he reached the bank entrance, the security guard held the door open without much eye contact. It wasn't unusual. People often avoided staring, not out of politeness, but out of discomfort. Marcus gave him a slight nod and maneuvered inside. Inside, conversations paused for just a moment, that subtle silence that fills a room when someone unexpected walks in. Then the noise resumed. A woman glanced, then turned away. Another customer shifted aside, muttering something under her breath. Marcus noticed, but he didn't react. He'd learned long ago not to waste energy on every sideways glance. What mattered was the mission. He was here to see how his customers were treated when no one knew who they were serving. Angela was behind the second counter, tapping through a transaction. Her eyes flicked briefly to the man approaching, well-dressed, wheelchair-bound, holding a check and a folder. She straightened instinctively, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," Marcus said softly, placing the check on the counter. She gave a practiced nod, glancing at the paper. Then, a slight smirk, the kind she didn't even realize she made, crept across her face. It was subtle, but telling. Marcus had seen that look before, years ago, in meetings, on sidewalks, in classrooms. The quick judgment that said you don't belong here. Angela cleared her throat. "Is this your check?" she asked, her tone careful but edged with suspicion. Marcus met her gaze. "Yes, it is," her fingers tapped the counter. "It's a pretty large amount. You said it's from one of our accounts?" He nodded calmly. "That's right." She hesitated. "Just a few seconds too long." Then she picked up the phone, turning slightly away, pretending to verify. Her voice lowered, but not enough to hide the doubt in it. Marcus watched quietly, his eyes tracing the ceiling lights above her. Every second of that pause told him what he needed to know. This wasn't just about policy. This was about perception. Behind her, another teller whispered something under her breath. Someone snickered. Marcus could feel the temperature in the room drop, not literally, but emotionally. Every gesture, every side glance created a weight in the air. Angela ended the call, turning back with an overly bright smile. "I'm just confirming the funds," she said, though no one had asked her to explain. "You understand, of course." Marcus nodded again. To her, it was routine. To him, it was a mirror, a reflection of everything wrong in a system that pretended fairness, but practiced quiet exclusion. But Marcus wasn't angry. Not yet. He was observant, and he was patient. Outside the bank, clouds began to gather, slow, gray, indifferent. The city carried on as usual, unaware that inside these walls, a small moment was about to expose something much bigger. Angela processed the check, still unconsciously treating him as a problem to solve rather than a person to serve. Her tone was clipped, her movements slightly exaggerated, the performance of someone trying to show control. When she finally handed the receipt back, she forced a smile. "There you go, all set." Marcus took it, folded it carefully, and said only, "Thank you." Then he paused. "Could I speak to your branch manager for a moment?" Her smile faltered. "The manager? About—" Marcus's tone was even. "Just a brief conversation." She gestured toward a glass office across the lobby. "That's Mr. Lawson, our branch head. I can check if he's available." He nodded again. "Please do." As she walked away, he looked around, watching how other customers were treated. A woman in a suit was greeted with warmth. A young man was offered assistance before he even reached the counter. But when another elderly black man entered moments later, Angela's colleague seemed to shift uncomfortably, offering short answers and minimal eye contact. Patterns. Predictable, practiced, poisonous patterns. The kind of prejudice that hides behind customer service smiles. When Mr. Lawson appeared, a tall man in a navy suit, his face lit up with confusion, then recognition. "Mr. Green?" I didn't expect you today. Angela froze. For a split second, her confident posture cracked. The phone in her hand trembled slightly. Marcus gave a polite nod. Good morning, Mr. Lawson. I thought I'd stop by and see how things were running. Lawson's tone changed immediately, deferential, nervous, respectful. Of course, sir. Would you like to come to my office? Angela blinked, her mind spinning. Sir? Marcus smiled gently. That won't be necessary right now. I just wanted to make sure everything's working as it should. He looked around again, slow, deliberate, then back at Angela. She could feel his gaze, but she couldn't hold it. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. When he finally turned to leave, the air felt heavier. Conversations hushed again, not out of prejudice this time, but out of realization. Angela stood frozen at her counter, her cheeks burning, her thoughts loud and panicked. Who was he really? And what had she just done? Outside, as Marcus wheeled himself toward the parking lot, a faint drizzle began to fall. Each drop seemed to echo the quiet weight of what had just happened. Small, invisible, but unstoppable, he had come here seeking answers. Now, he had all the proof he needed, and by the time the storm passed, the bank and everyone inside would never see him the same way again. The drizzle had turned into rain by the time Marcus reached his car, each drop a soft percussion against the glass. He sat still for a long moment, watching the ripples form across the windshield. His hands rested calmly on the armrests of his wheelchair. Still, his eyes were sharp, awake, calculating, burning beneath the surface. Inside the bank, life had already resumed. The line moved. Keyboards clicked. Conversations filled the air again. The routine rhythm of a place that had already forgotten the man who'd just walked out. But Marcus hadn't forgotten. He didn't believe in loud retaliation. He'd seen too many people fight back in anger only to be dismissed as emotional or difficult. He believed in precision, the kind that left no room for excuses. He opened his phone, made a quiet call, and said just 6 words. Activate audit, Lincoln State, immediate effect. Then he hung up. The next day, he returned, not through the front doors this time, but through the executive entrance at the side of the building. Inside, Angela was already at her desk, sipping coffee and replaying yesterday's moment in her mind. Sleep had been restless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that man's calm expression. The way the branch manager's tone had shifted in an instant. Her stomach twisted at the memory. She didn't know who he was, but she knew she'd made a mistake. Maybe a small one, perhaps a big one. She told herself it wasn't about race, that she'd just been doing her job. But deep down, she knew. It was the tone, the hesitation, the disbelief, tiny fractures that, when added up, spelled something ugly. Still, she brushed the thought aside. People overreact all the time, she told herself. It's just a misunderstanding. Then, at 9 a.m. sharp, the branch manager called an emergency staff meeting. Angela exchanged puzzled glances with her colleagues as they gathered near the back office. Mr. Lawson stood there, his tie slightly askew, his expression tense. Effective immediately, he said, we'll be undergoing a full compliance audit. Corporate oversight is coming in to review customer service procedures, discrimination reports, and overall conduct. The room went silent. Angela's breath caught. Discrimination reports? Mr. Lawson continued. This will include a complete review of employee performance, both past and present. Please cooperate fully. Then he added, almost reluctantly, the directive came from the owner himself. The owner. Angela's pulse skipped. She looked down, pretending to take notes, but her hands trembled slightly. She didn't need to ask who. She already knew. The next morning, the lobby looked different. Corporate banners had been replaced. Observers in suits stood quietly in corners, watching interactions, taking notes, and then, just before noon, Marcus entered again, through the main door this time. The guard straightened and opened it quickly. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Angela felt her stomach drop. He was dressed the same way as before. Sharp suit, calm expression, quiet authority. But this time everyone knew. The silent owner of the bank had arrived, and whispers rippled through the room like static electricity. She tried to smile when he approached her counter, but the words caught in her throat. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, his tone polite but steady. "May I make a deposit?" Angela nodded, fumbling slightly with the paperwork. Of course, sir." He handed over an envelope. Her fingers brushed against it, steady but cold. For a moment their eyes met. She saw no anger, no mockery, just an unshakable calm that felt heavier than rage. Marcus oversaw her, every movement deliberate. He didn't need to raise his voice. Silence was more powerful than shouting. As she processed the deposit, she noticed one of the auditors observing her. Every detail, her tone, her posture, her responses, was being recorded. Her throat felt dry. Finally, she handed the receipt back. "All done, Mr. Green. Thank you," he said softly. "You're very efficient when you try." Her chest tightened. It wasn't the words themselves, it was how they were said. Calm, factual, undeniable. He turned slightly, glancing around the room. "You've worked here a while, haven't you, Ms. Reed?" She nodded, barely audible. "Yes, sir." 6 years. Good. Longevity is valuable," he said, his tone thoughtful. "It shows commitment. It also means you understand how culture forms in a place like this." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Culture starts at the counter." And with that, he wheeled away, leaving a silence so thick it seemed to absorb every sound in the room. The next few days blurred into unease. Reports circulated. Meetings were held behind closed doors. The compliance team conducted interviews. Quiet, meticulous, unhurried. Angela tried to keep her focus on the transactions, but her confidence had evaporated. Every time she looked at Marcus's photo, now displayed on the lobby wall, her stomach clenched tighter. It wasn't just guilt, it was exposure. The painful realization that one small act, one careless smirk, had become a mirror for something far more profound. The whispers grew louder. Some co-workers avoided her. Others comforted her with platitudes, like everyone makes mistakes. But their eyes told another story. Outside, the community began to take notice, too. A post appeared online, anonymous at first, describing how a disabled black man had been mocked by a teller in his own bank. The story spread fast, picked up by local blogs, then national pages. No names were mentioned, but those inside the building didn't need them. They knew. One morning, as Angela parked her car, she saw reporters across the street. Cameras, notepads, questions waiting like vultures. Her hands shook as she entered the building. Inside, Marcus was there again, this time in the conference room with the board. Through the glass, she could see him speaking calmly, gesturing occasionally, his face composed. She looked away. Later that day, a memo went out to all staff. Effective. Immediately, Lincoln State Bank will implement a zero-tolerance policy toward discriminatory conduct, visible or implied. All staff will undergo bias training and quarterly empathy assessments. Leadership accountability will be enforced. Angela read it twice. Her vision blurred. That night she couldn't sleep. Her apartment felt too quiet, the clock too loud. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment at the counter over and over. The way she had looked at him, the tone she'd used, the doubt that wasn't professional. It was personal, and for the first time she didn't try to justify it. She admitted it. The prejudice she'd inherited, subtle, silent, shaped by years of whispers and jokes and half-truths, had become part of her reflexes. And now it had finally shown its face. She wanted to apologize. But how do you apologize for something like that? For something so much bigger than one mistake? The next morning she arrived early. The bank was still empty, the floors gleaming, the sunlight slanting across the counters. Marcus was already there. He was reviewing paperwork in the lobby, speaking quietly with an assistant. When he looked up, she froze, but he smiled faintly. "Ms. Reed," he said, acknowledging her presence. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Green, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how I treated you that day. I was wrong." The air between them felt fragile, like a glass surface that could crack at the slightest word. Marcus regarded her carefully, his eyes soft but unreadable. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "Not everyone would." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I didn't realize, I wasn't aware how I sounded. I've been thinking about it nonstop." He paused, then said, "Awareness is a start. Change takes work." She nodded again, tears welling in her eyes. "I know. I'm going to try." For the first time, Marcus smiled. Not out of forgiveness, but out of quiet hope. That's all any of us can do. By midday, the auditors concluded their assessment. The findings were clear. Multiple complaints, subtle, discriminatory behaviors, and a lack of diversity training. But Marcus didn't fire anyone that day. He didn't make a spectacle. He ordered reforms. And quietly, he made a decision. Angela would stay, under one condition. She would help lead the new inclusion program for frontline staff. When she received the notice, she felt both stunned and undeserving. But she accepted. Because maybe redemption wasn't about escaping your mistake. Perhaps it was about owning it and helping others see what you couldn't before. Weeks passed. The story faded from the headlines, replaced by newer controversies. But inside Lincoln State Bank, something had shifted. The tone of voices, the patience at the counters, the way people looked at one another. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was progress. And every time Marcus visited, customers greeted him warmly. Some thanked him, some just nodded. He didn't need recognition, only change. And one afternoon, as he rolled past Angela's counter, he paused. She was helping an elderly black woman with a form, her tone gentle, her patience steady. When the woman smiled, Angela smiled back, genuinely this time. Marcus nodded faintly, the corner of his lips lifting in quiet approval. He turned toward the door, feeling the sunlight break through the glass again, just as it had the first day he'd entered. But this time, the air felt lighter, cleaner, almost hopeful. Then, just as the screen might fade to black, a faint voice called behind him, "Mr. Green?" He turned slightly. Angela stood by the counter, her expression nervous but sincere. "Yes," he said. "Thank you for giving me another chance." Marcus smiled gently. "Sometimes the lesson isn't for the one who was wronged," he said. "It's for the one who finally sees." And with that, he left, the door closing softly behind him, the sound echoing like the final note of a long, unfinished song. Outside, as Marcus rolled into the bright afternoon light, his phone buzzed. A message from corporate headquarters appeared on the screen. "Audit complete. System-wide issues identified. Immediate action required." He stared at it for a moment, the faint shadow of a smile crossing his face. This wasn't just one branch's story. It was a reflection of something much bigger. Something he wasn't done fighting yet. And as he moved forward, the city lights flickered across his reflection in the window. A man once underestimated, now quietly rewriting the meaning of power. The day of the corporate hearing arrived with a heaviness that settled over the city like fog. Outside Lincoln State's headquarters, cameras lined the sidewalks, their lenses glinting under the gray sky. News vans idled, waiting. The story had grown beyond a local scandal now. It was a national headline. Bank owner to address allegations of systemic racism within his own branches. Marcus Green sat in the back of the car, silent. His reflection in the tinted window looked calm, but inside, the quiet storm of purpose churned. This wasn't just about one teller anymore. It was about everything that moment had represented. Every subtle humiliation he'd felt before, every unspoken assumption he'd lived beneath. He adjusted his tie, his fingers brushing against the cold steel of his wheelchair's armrest. His driver glanced back. "Ready, sir?" Marcus exhaled slowly. "Yes, let's finish this." Inside the auditorium, hundreds of employees filled the seats. The air buzzed with tension. Whispered rumors, nervous glances, phones clutched tightly. At the front stood a simple podium with the company's crest. A row of executives lined the stage, faces stiff and rehearsed. The board had insisted Marcus address the issue publicly, not as a reprimand, but as a promise of reform. When he entered, the room fell silent. The sound of his wheelchair gliding across the floor seemed impossibly loud. Every turn of the wheels echoed off the polished wood until he stopped beneath the bright white light. He looked at the faces before him, faces of every color, class, and background. And some ashamed, some defensive, some are waiting for absolution. He took a breath, the kind that seemed to steady the entire room with it. "When I walked into one of my own banks 2 weeks ago," he began, his voice calm but heavy, "I wasn't seen as a customer. I wasn't seen as a man. I was seen as a problem." A ripple moved through the audience, an uncomfortable shuffle, averted eyes. He continued, "I was doubted, dismissed, and disrespected, not because of what I did, but because of what I looked like, because I was in a wheelchair, because I was black." He let the words hang in the air, deliberate, inescapable. "I didn't announce who I was. I didn't need to. I wanted to see what others like me experience every day. When no one's watching, when there's no camera, when fairness is just a slogan on a wall." Murmurs rose again, but Marcus's tone sharpened. "And what I found was not just one person's prejudice. It was culture. Quiet, polite, invisible, but everywhere." He paused, scanning the crowd. Do you know how many complaints we've received in the last 6 months? 27. Most of them are from minorities, all of them dismissed as misunderstandings. He looked toward the front row, where Angela sat, her face pale, her eyes glistening. She couldn't look away. I met one of those complaints myself, Marcus said, softer now, from a woman who believed she was doing her job. And maybe she was. But her job had been shaped by something deeper, something she never questioned. That's how prejudice survives, not in loud words, but in quiet ones. In hesitation, in tone. Angela's chest rose and fell fast. She knew the line was about her, but he never said her name. He didn't need to. Today, Marcus continued, I'm not here to fire anyone. I'm here to expose the truth, because justice isn't punishment. Justice is change. He motioned toward the screen behind him. A series of customer reports flashed, transcripts, emails, timestamps, subtle patterns of dismissal and bias. Gasps filled the room as faces recognized their own initials on the screen. This, Marcus said, is what silence looks like when it's written down. Then he pressed a button on the podium. The lights dimmed. A video began to play. Security footage from the bank's lobby. The clip showed him entering and moving toward Angela's counter. The smirk, the hesitation, the whispered laughter behind the desk. It was quiet, almost unbearably so, except for the faint hum of the camera. When the lights came back on, the room was frozen. No one moved. Angela's hands shook in her lap. She wanted to disappear, to crawl inside herself and never emerge. Tears pressed behind her eyes. Marcus's voice broke the silence. We all saw it. And some of you felt a little uncomfortable watching it. Good. You should. That's what truth feels like. He turned slightly toward Angela's direction, his tone gentler. But discomfort can do one of two things. It can harden you, or it can wake you. He looked back at the crowd. I choose the second. As he spoke, the atmosphere shifted. People leaned forward, caught between guilt and awe. This wasn't anger they were hearing. It was something sharper, controlled, undeniable. Marcus continued, This isn't the first time I've been judged for how I look. But I hope it's the last time someone here judges another human being the same way. Because if we can't trust the people behind the counters, we can't call ourselves a community bank. He paused, his voice softening to almost a whisper. Do you know what it feels like to be invisible? To walk into a room and watch someone's respect shrink before you even speak? To realize their politeness is only skin deep? He swallowed hard. That's the weight I carry. Every day, and I'm not the only one. For the first time, emotion cracked through his composure. His voice wavered, not from weakness, but from the rawness of memory. He looked toward the back rows where several black employees sat still, their expressions heavy. I see you, he said. And I promise, this place will see you too. The room fell silent again. Angela pressed her hands to her mouth, a small sob escaping despite her effort to hold it in. Marcus turned back to the board members seated behind him. You have a choice, he said. We can issue apologies and statements, or we can rebuild, starting today, with policies that mean something. He pressed another button. The screen displayed a document titled Project Unity. It outlined sweeping reforms, racial equity audits, bias training led by external experts, anonymous employee review channels, and inclusive hiring programs. This is not a proposal, Marcus said. It's a directive, and it starts now. Then he paused, looking directly into the cameras, because if one man in a wheelchair has to roll into the speech that day had rippled far beyond Lincoln State's walls. It was replayed on news channels, studied in university ethics classes, and dissected in podcasts and talk shows. Yet, for Marcus Green, none of that mattered as much as what came next. He had made a promise, not just to the board or the cameras, but to himself. And promises to him meant movement. Inside the main branch, the atmosphere was different now. Subtle, but real. The posters that once boasted customer first now read, "Everyone deserves dignity." Staff meetings began with reflection sessions, not quarterly goals, and the very desk where Angela once sat now hosted the new Diversity and Fair Practice officer. Some employees resisted. Others rolled their eyes, calling it corporate theater. But then people started talking. Stories surfaced from tellers and clients alike. Quiet apologies, unexpected kindnesses, questions asked before judgments made. It wasn't perfection, but it was progress. And progress, Marcus thought, was its own kind of revolution. Angela returned to work 2 weeks after the hearing. She'd asked for a private meeting with Marcus, not as an employee, but as a human being trying to face her reflection. When she entered his office, her steps were careful, her face pale. "I don't expect forgiveness," she began softly, "but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry for what I did and for what I didn't see." Marcus looked up from his papers. The lines around his eyes were deep, not from anger, but from years of carrying things heavier than words. "Do you understand what hurt most?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "That I didn't even think twice. That I looked at you and saw someone less." The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable, but cleansing. Finally, Marcus said, "Awareness is the first step. Change is the next. Don't waste the first by stopping there." Angela's eyes glistened. She nodded and left quietly, but her face carried something new. Not shame, but resolve. Months later, Marcus was invited to speak at a youth conference, Breaking Barriers, Conversations on Race and Respect. Standing on stage before hundreds of young faces, he began, "Change doesn't begin in laws or boardrooms. It begins in moments, when someone chooses to see instead of assume." He paused, scanning the crowd. "I once believed I could change the world by running a successful business. But success means nothing if it doesn't lift others with it." A young man raised his hand. "Sir, what do you say to people who think racism is too big to fix?" Marcus smiled faintly. "I'd say, you don't fix a mountain by moving it. You start by carving a path through it." The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes, curious, hopeful, uncertain, fixed on him. He continued, "Each time you speak truth where silence used to live, you cut a new path. It may not reach the summit today, but one day someone else will follow it and finish what you began." That night, after the event, Marcus stood alone outside the hall. The city lights shimmered across the wet pavement, the distant hum of traffic blending into the soft rush of wind. He took a deep breath, the same kind of breath he'd taken months earlier, before the hearing, but this time it felt lighter. He watched a group of young volunteers laughing as they packed up banners, their skin tones a mosaic of color and culture. It made him smile. He thought of his younger self, the boy who once sat in a cramped apartment watching his mother get denied a loan. The man who swore he'd build a system where fairness wasn't a luxury. He thought of the journey, the wheelchair, the humiliation, the speech, the reform, and realized that the story was never just his. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they were less than human and chose to rise anyway. The next morning, Marcus revisited the community branch, not to inspect, but to observe. He watched a young teller, a recruit, greet an elderly black woman with a warm smile and genuine patience. No rush, no assumption, just respect. The woman left beaming. Marcus caught the teller's eye and nodded approvingly. The teller smiled back, unaware of who he was, but sensing somehow that the gesture meant something. And for the first time in years, Marcus felt peace settle in his chest, the kind that doesn't need applause to exist. That evening, he sat by his window, journal open, pen in hand. He wrote just one line, not for publication, not for policy, but for remembrance. Justice isn't a destination. It's a direction, and I'm still moving. He closed the book, exhaled, and looked out at the skyline, now painted gold by the setting sun. The city glowed, alive with stories yet to be told, and somewhere out there, perhaps in another small branch, another man or woman was being seen, really seen, for the first time. Racism doesn't vanish when exposed. It fades when replaced with empathy, education, and courage. Because the accurate measure of justice isn't how loudly we speak, but how deeply we change. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Please share it. Talk about it and tell someone why equality matters. What would you have done in Marcus's place? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might be the spark for someone else's change. If this story touched your heart, let it echo beyond you. Hit like to honor the courage within it. Share it to awaken hope in someone else. And subscribe for more true tales that ignite the soul and remind us what humanity truly means.